This video has been brought to you by The Weekly Reset. Thank you to our sponsor, because that's what gave me the idea for today's video as I was looking at possible upgrades for my characters in the Great Vault. We do have something coming up, I'm sorry to say, which is a very likely nerf to the speed of acquisition of crests, or in short, the amount of items you can upgrade every week to max level thanks to your crests. This made me think about the itemization right now in the game, because after all, this season, Season 2, is the fastest season possibly ever that we have had when it comes to getting max item level. Very early, very quickly, players were able to get close to max item level, with 5 items per week being upgradable from 431 to 441 meant that in just 3 weeks of Mythic Plus you could get 15 items at 441 item level. So basically nearly your entire gear at 441 item level. And also in 3 weeks you would have gotten almost basically 2 items crafted at 447, not to mention 2 items from the Great Vault at 447, which means that by 3 weeks in this season you were at 442 to 443 item level, which is very fast. Now, with the fact that we know Blizzard is nerfing the speed of us gearing up so quickly, allowing them to better balance raid bosses, being able to balance the early raid bosses for a lower item level, the mid raid bosses for a mid item level, and then the later bosses for a much higher item level, which is something they couldn't really do this season because of how quickly everyone just roided up in item level so fast. There are a few thoughts about what to do in Season 3 when it comes to gear. My take, which is usually the correct one, is to swap, to substitute quantity for quality. What I mean by that is that right now we are basically showered in gear. If you think about it, back when the season started, we could upgrade 5 items from 431 to 441. So we had basically a weekly choice of 5 different Mythic Plus items to get to max item level, plus the item we get from the Great Vault, plus the item we get from crafting, plus possibly whichever item you get from the raid. So we are talking about 6 to 8 items per week, which is a gigantic amount of loot. However, all of this loot, besides what you choose to craft, is basically up completely to RNG. What would be my suggestion for Season 3 is to, lower down the amount of items we can get every week. Maybe go from 6 to 8 down to 3 to 4. Like, cut it in half completely. But replace the quantity with more quality. Replace that with more deterministic rewards, much like the crafting one. For example, how about our dear friend the Dinar? Used in what feels now a fever dream of a season, Season 4 of Shadowlands and then Forgotten. That was a pretty good way of determining a piece of gear for yourself. For those who are not aware, the Dinar was the reward for a quest which required you to defeat bosses, and then you would get your Dinar, get a second quest for the Dinar to kill a fewer amount of bosses, get your second Dinar, and then get the last quest for the last Dinar to kill even fewer bosses. So it was staggered to basically give you all 3 Dinars in about 6 weeks, in about a month and a half, and then you had, after a month and a half, your choice. Your 3 items from the raid you could just hand pick yourself. That would be, for example, a good beginning to make a return to more quality over quantity. The fact that now, you get fewer random ass pieces of Mythic Plus gear you manage to loot from the end cache that you can upgrade with quests, because we're gonna earn fewer quests and you will not have that much currency to upgrade everything. But now we have the Dinar, where you can just pick and choose certain items. For example, we are some 4+ months into the season and my Paladin still doesn't have the Rashok's trinket from Mythic, still doesn't have the beacon from Sarkaret. So there are still a few items, even though both of these characters have been 445+, even right now 447, they're still missing at least a couple of best in slot items. So by now I have basically vendored 60, 70, 80, 90 items I have been looting because they are just random trash I don't need. So what if we start looting fewer items and having the chance to upgrade fewer items, but we add a few more ways to allow us to have a higher chance at the very least to loot what we need. Another example to go closer towards quality of your gear rather than quantity of options is the Great Vault. There is one major disparity when you look at the Raid Vault and the Mythic Plus Vault. What do you think this disparity is? It's very simple. The amount of loot available in the raid is much lower than the possible amount of loot from Mythic Plus, because the raid is right now 9 bosses, while Mythic Plus is 8 entire dungeons with something like 40 bosses. So of course the loot table of Mythic Plus is much larger, which means the chances of you getting that specific best in slot is far lower than the raid. Changing that could be a good help towards moving closer towards having more quality on your gear rewards than having quantity. Why, for example, don't we invent, or rather introduce, because it already exists in WoW, a ban system? Much like banning battlegrounds from your PvP choices, why can't we let players ban something like 4 dungeons from their Great Vault pool? Imagine you have a best-in-slot trinket from Halls of Infusion, a best-in-slot trinket from Brackenide Hollow, and that's all you care about. Fine, just ban 4 other dungeons and suddenly you have a 50% higher chance of getting those 2 trinkets. It's definitely not a deterministic reward, it's definitely not warranted, but it would go a long way towards ensuring over time with chance that you can get those items, for example. Randomness is not always fun, right? I have found in my vault 2 different 450 item level beacons on my evoker, who doesn't use beacon, and 0 on my paladin, who very much wants a beacon, for example. That doesn't feel too nice, you know? While I'm getting showered in loot, I can upgrade from Mythic Plus with crests that gets obsolete after 3 weeks, because after 3 weeks you have all of your gear upgraded. I would have much rather taken 6 weeks to upgrade all of my gear that way, because the crests have been nerfed, but in return having a higher chance of getting the beacon from the Great Vault, for example. That, I think, would have been much more satisfying for your character gear progression. We can keep talking about quality with another thing which can add quality to your gear. You know what it is? It's the catalyst. This elusive thing, which apparently is so slow to activate, it takes 1.5 months before it even becomes available in a season. Why don't we make that happen a little bit earlier, right? Once more, that would add quality to your gear, because now you can get your tier up online faster. So you don't need nearly as many items showered to you in Mythic Plus if you can get your 4 pieces of your tier set online much earlier. That would, you know, it's a trade. It's a trade. You have fewer amount of items you can upgrade every week, for example, but in return you get a faster tier. That seems like a trade many players would be willing to go for, especially non-raiding players, Mythic Plus only players who already loot way too much Mythic Plus gear because of the amount of runs they do. It seems like this would be a trade they would take very happily, for example. These type of things look like changes which might make nerfing the crests acquisition in Season 3, nerfing the amount of upgrades you can do every week, and in short, slowing the growth of your item level compared to this season. Those could make the change more bearable for the player base, because sure, now you won't be 445 item level after a month, you will be 445 item level after 2 months. However, you now have 3 dinars where you hand-picked your 3 pieces from the raid, so you got your trinket you wanted, the weapon you wanted, and the ring you wanted, and then you also got a higher chance from the Great Vault to get the other couple of items that you needed from Mythic Plus. So it's much more likely that you will now reach that 445 item level twice as slowly, but with much more pieces of your best in slot gear, which I think is a fair trade. And since I do think, as I said this before, I do think it actively helps Blizzard to slow down the item level of the player base in terms of growth, not because of the things like, keeping the players online more often, making them spend more time in game, etc, but more because of the balancing, being able to balance more and better the raid bosses, growing with item level, and to a degree even Mythic Plus, the growth of Mythic Plus progression over time. I think that should be done at the same time by giving players better quality of life tools when it comes to getting gear. No doubt, Blizzard has increased the help given to the player base in how they can manipulate the gear they get. If you think about it, just a few years ago, we had no crest system, we didn't even have a Valor upgrade system before it was reintroduced, we had no Great Vault, we didn't even have a weekly cache like we had in BFA, we had zero crafting system to this degree of best-in-slot items either, and also we had no Catalyst and we had no DINARS. So clearly, in the last couple of expansions, Blizzard has done many things to improve the quality of life of the gearing process, that's certain. However, I still think we are missing a few things. I still think we can improve the acquisition of items in terms of quality more so than quantity. I think Season 2 was definitely the season of quantity, was the season of getting showered in upgrade tokens and being able to get to max item level very fast. I think next season we should try to find a middle of the way, a compromise between the amount of things we can upgrade and the speed in which we can get to max item level versus the actual worth of the item. Rather than having the chance to upgrade a dozen of different random Mythic Plus trinkets that you don't even need or find powerful, what if you have, only 4 of them or 5 instead of 12, but one of those 4 or 5 is your best in slot item that right now you're still looking for because you still haven't even looted. I think that would go a good way to improving the quality of life as well as the satisfaction of the players towards improving their character over time. Now, of course, some of you see absolutely nothing wrong with this gearing system, so they don't feel the need to change anything. Or maybe some of you do feel like there is something that needs to be changed, but they would go at it a different way than what I suggested, which is obviously insane because my takes are definitely correct on this one, but if you have any different ones, please go ahead in the comments and let me know what would you do to improve the quality of life when it comes to gearing up your characters over time throughout a season. So with this little talk about gearing, we can now leave each other for today. Thanks, of course, as usual, to all of the Patreon supporters for the contribution and the help to the growth of the channel, which, as usual, once more, can be given completely for free. You can like and comment down below, as well as subscribe to the channel itself. Now, with this disclaimer out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, August is now gone. We are now entering September. It's also nice that it's been chill, no more heat waves, so I think the camera is also coming back quite soon.